April. Prior to that, he was the editor of the Star Tribune in Minnesota for 8 years. While editor, the paper won the Pulitzer Prize for breaking news in 2021. And prior to that, while he was a supervising editor for, I'm assuming, investigations, the Star Tribune won the Pulitzer Prize project for local news in 2013 for a story about deaths in home daycare centers. Before going to Minnesota, Rene worked for 17 years at the Washington Post as a reporter. He is a New Orleans native, and he's a graduate of Loyola University in New Orleans. So welcome, Rene.
Let's see. Thank you, Jude. Can you all hear me? Let's see, which mic is it?
I think
the little one? Okay. Just let me know if you all can't hear me. Thank you very much. Let's see. Can you hear me now? Okay. Editor's edit, right? So I'm going to edit Julie right from the get-go. I don't feel like relatively new. I feel very new. Still very much getting started. But thank you all very much for having me today. And thank you more broadly for your interest in and support of local media, local news. As you'll hear me say in a few minutes, I just think that support, which we have to earn, is more important than ever. And so what I was going to do today is tell you a little bit about myself, some of our plans, and sort of my feelings on this moment in journalism. But as I said to Julie, that I don't like to have elaborate presentations or talk all day. I much prefer people's questions and thoughts that I can react to and make it more of a conversation than just me feeling like it's a lecture of any sort. So I am brand new. I got back in April, and for such a long time, as a native of New Orleans and my whole family in southern Louisiana, I had been on like the 2 or 3 times a year plan, you know, holidays, weddings, things like that. And so it is just such a thrill to be back full-time in a role like this. It just has immense meaning to me to be able to try as best I can to lead journalism toward what's next for the Times-Picayune and the Advocate in our 3 newsroom setup from New Orleans to Lafayette. You know, some people have said to me, like, oh, you know, well, tell me why you decided to come back. And, you know, there are lots of reasons. My entire family is here. I was really sick of trying to figure out from 1,000 miles away how to watch all the Saints games. And I was only having about 1 shrimp po' boy a year, which seemed to be way low. And so to have all that now all the time is quite a blessing. But I try to tell people that that kind of sentiment, while great, is actually not why I decided to come back. Frankly, the reason is because I really would not have come back if I thought in a job like this that I would be presiding over an era of decline or defeat for newsrooms given the headwinds in our profession. In fact, it's actually quite the opposite, that I feel very confident that with the kind of ownership the Advocate and the Times-Picayune have now with the publisher, they are deeply committed to growing journalism and in a sense, growing journalism in exactly the way it should be, which is a commitment to journalism in the public interest with strong values. And frankly, we have the kind of strategy that demands that when you have a strategy in which you're beckoning people to become loyal subscribers, print and digital, you have to lead with your work and the strength and the principle of your work. And so what's so exciting for me is not just to be back home close to family and the things I love, but that we're going to be embarking on a next chapter of journalism that I think readers and people who really care about Louisiana and the communities across southern Louisiana can appreciate. And my hope is as we do that, the sense of trust, the sense of emotional connection to our brand only grows. And really just getting started, but I'll talk a few minutes about what some of our priorities will be as I get rolling. That's a very, that question to me only has one answer to start, which is that first and foremost, we always have to have a public service mission at the top of the list. Nothing should ever come second to that. And accountability journalism, shining light on the issues that matter deeply to a community, has to be job one for us. And so some of the things, we're pressing on that more and more. It's not like that work was not being done and done well before I got here, but some examples are, for example, the intensity of focus we've been doing in recent months on the State's Department of Child and Family Services, where Andrea Gallo, a great reporter, has been just doing an exceptional job shining light, and we've been publishing in-depth journalism that we hope can make a real difference on that very important subject across Louisiana. Our environmental work is another priority, and we're putting more and more emphasis on that. So you will always see first on my watch as strong as a commitment as we can have to public service journalism and intense focus on issues that matter in the lives of families. And frankly, just the broad population. I have no interest at all in aiming our work just at a few zip codes of like bedrock supporters. I think we have to continue to dare ourselves on the strength and depth of our work, on the fairness of our work, to appeal to the broadest set of readers that we can, because that makes for, I just think it's sort of a core foundational part of a democracy if a democracy is going to function well, particularly in an era of deep polarization. Like, it's our job for our work to crack through all of that noise and all of that, at times, frustration and anger, and to sort of hold its place as a vital part of a community's awareness about the issues. And, that is a big challenge in this era, but it's one that we have to face up to with humility as well as a deep sense of fairness, even as we're striving to be relentless and show people the kinds of things that we think they should be thinking about as citizens of a community. So one pillar for me will always be public service journalism first, but I think it's really important in this era with so many big issues, difficult issues, issues in which the average reader can feel helpless or just overwhelmed, that we really have to shine light as well on the phrase in our profession is often like solutions journalism. What's working? What might be? What might work? How are members of a community or groups trying to make things better? And so about a month ago, we launched a new digital and print section that appears every week called Louisiana Inspired. And that is an attempt to respond to something that I've heard from readers for many years, which is that the news is too negative, it's too bleak, give me hope, show me something that is hopeful. And so we're placing a fresh bet and some emphasis on that kind of journalism as well. And even though it's only existed for a month, the reader response has been exceptionally positive. So I can say that, in a sense, my two biggest priorities as we get started are those two things most: public service journalism, accountability journalism, and solutions journalism that sort of balances the portrait of what we do to readers, and so that as we're showing them or presenting to them tough questions about things in a community, that we're also showing them some positive things as well. And I think each helps the other, and it just has a fuller sense of capturing the reality of a place, as opposed to being in one sense, only positive and sort of silly, or only relentlessly negative. And so what you will see unfolding in all three markets over the next few months and beyond is, I hope, a deeper commitment to both of those priorities and goals. We have a really strong staff that I can tell you, as I've gotten to know them, really committed to the community, really deeply interested in fighting for journalism. Let's see. Oh, okay, there you go. Thank you. In sort of fighting for the principles of journalism at a time when, a lot of those things are under siege. You look around the country, whether it's Louisiana, the South, or nationally, there's a lot of headwinds on journalism, and communities are more and more lacking news that has depth, that gives them clarity about their community. And so I think we particularly have a responsibility to try to step into that void, and on the strength of our reporting and our commitment to fairness, that we are giving readers the most comprehensive report we can, so that the democracy itself has that light on it, and that people can really think about what's happening in the realm of politics and public policy in a way that's smarter and deeper. I think it's a very strange time right now, because there are so many strange things loose in media that's not credible, and we have to be the most credible media if we expect democracy to function well, and we can't be self-defeating about it. We have to, despite whatever headwinds exist, we have to find solutions to make sure that our newsroom is formidable, and that we do not drift into an era of cuts or lack of coverage, because I think that will only serve to undermine our democracy. And, I want our readership, whether it's any of you all or your neighbors and friends, I want you all to have the highest expectations of our work. When I think about the gifts we have of local ownership, of a publisher with values really rooted in the news, with the strength of our staff, I think shame on me, shame on us, if we don't give you the best journalism that makes a difference in a community, and that makes a difference in our democracy. So with that, I will stop talking, and I hope that's at least a first framing of some of our priorities at the Times-Picayune and the Advocate as I get started. And I'd love to open it up for questions about anything I just talked about, or anything else on your mind. I will say that along with all the journalism of the news, I do handle circulation and delivery problems, so also happy to field any of those and try to get that fixed if there's an issue. So thank you all. So I don't know how the questions work, but however y'all want to do it, go ahead.
Yeah, so obviously a lot of advertising related to sports media, sports betting in the media right now. Oftentimes sponsoring coverage of sports betting. Do you have any concerns around that, either from a conflict of interest standpoint or from a public health standpoint, in terms of how many people struggle with addiction to gambling?
I think it's something we have to keep in mind. I think, how should I put it? Newsrooms across America accept all forms of advertising that raise similar questions. And so I think we have to be responsible about it. It feels mostly like a separate lane of content, and it doesn't really affect the way we cover anything from the Saints or LSU. In a sense, I guess I would say too that if we handle it responsibly, which I think we are, I have to stress that it is a significant revenue avenue that helps build the kind of newsroom that we need for the kind of aspirations we have. But I appreciate the question, because it is something top of mind, and I think as that evolves, frankly, around the country, because as sports betting is legalized in more and more states, I think you're going to see in more and more newsrooms that form of advertising emerge, and thus, how you wrestle with the questions about it. But we've done the same thing with questions of alcohol advertising and, and managing that in a way so that, on the one hand, it's a legal pastime, but on the other hand, you don't want to be, have expressions of advertising that go farther than they should. So I hope that answers it. Go ahead.
I do an outdoor show. And right now in outdoors, usually in Louisiana, we always have a controversy. But the paper I noticed lately that is doing an excellent job, especially the feature writers, of listening to both sides, quoting different people. I think that, not just our editorial, but the feature article right now, the Pokey books, the version canal, last few weeks, the version. That's more of a compliment, not so much a question.
Well,
that continues.
Thank you very much. I'll frame it into a question, which is that, we have to approach news coverage, whether you're me or whether you're a reporter, not with a sense that before you leave the office, you know the story already, right? There's nothing more important than having the humility to listen to all sides of a debate and to fairly reflect all sides of a debate. Now, I want to be careful with that, though, because I think something is sort of loose in our profession that is something that's worth everyone thinking about, right? Which is that when I talk about fairness, what I don't mean is stenography or kind of a false commitment to spotlighting things that aren't factual. I just believe that, when someone like me or a journalist is presented with a track of, say, activism on a subject or stenography on a subject, I kind of reject both tracks. And I think there's just a world of authoritative journalism between those two extremes. And that's where we have to sit and fairly report the news day in and day out. So,
one of the outdoor writers, the legend, Joe Michaelucci.
Oh, yeah.
He knows get up at 8. I hope we all replace him. We all find somebody, because he is really brings everything to life.
That's great to hear.
He does.
Go ahead.
Hello. What are you going to do to fill the void left by Mark Ballard?
Well,
22. How do you win the cartoon caption contest?
I'll start with part two. I do not know. All I know is that Walt gets a weekly deluge of people playing that, and so I wish I had an inside tip there, but I don't. On our political coverage, we're working on that right now. Mark Ballard just kind of replanted our flag in Washington, D.C., and he is just getting started. I want that to be a reflection of my priorities as well, because that had gone dormant for a while. And I talked to Mark about his interest in going to Washington and revive our coverage and have more sustained, deep coverage of our delegation. And he was really intrigued with that. And so I think he'll be great. I think Mark walks the line of fairness as well as any journalist I've ever met. And so I have high hopes that his work in Washington will bring a new dimension to our current report. And as he sets up shop in Washington for us this fall, we are absolutely working to fortify our Capitol Bureau. And so I'm certain by the end of the year, we will have Mark in Washington, as he is now, and a fully staffed Capitol Bureau heading into the governor's race of 2023. That's a big priority, and I am literally working on that every day. But right now we're focused on getting Mark settled and rolling with Washington coverage, and I think he's had his first few stories from there, and sort of he's getting connected to the delegation in full. So you'll see more news on that front between now and I'd say Thanksgiving or so. Go ahead, sir.
Have y'all decided whether or not y'all gonna make any endorsements, or whether y'all right now in the process of deciding whether you're gonna decide?
Yeah, I apologies if I state this imprecisely, because since my definition is very new, the advocate, I am told, or I've since learned, hasn't been in the business of endorsing political candidates, just ballot initiatives, things like that, whereas the Times-Picayune has. And so what I anticipate is that tradition to continue. So I do anticipate an endorsement season in the weeks ahead, but none of those sessions have occurred yet. But I think that the usual traditions will apply of the Advocate brand and the Times-Picayune brand on that front. Go ahead, Julie.
I'm going to piggyback on that a little bit.
Sure.
I just want to put in my 2 cents. I would love some endorsements in some of these lower level races. It's very hard, and I feel like I'm an engaged news reader with like judges and constables. I mean, I don't like, I'm pretty engaged, and I'm like, who knows? And I do consult people, but it would also be nice. I actually would like an editorial board to weigh in. I don't necessarily need to know who the Advocate editorial board wants me to vote for president, but like some of these lower level races, it's tough to get any sort of nonpartisan information about.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
No, I think that's an important point. I'll be honest with you, that will be difficult to do this fall. And one of the things that I think in this next chapter of the brand, I think one of the things we have to figure out how to build is a team there that has the staffing and the time to dive deeper into that. The whole sense, actually, of that part of our enterprise, editorial comment, op-ed, community comment, we're in a lot of discussions right now as to how to reinvent that for the digital age, which offers all kinds of opportunity. And frankly, there are some readers, as you know, their only experience with journalism is the phone in their hand. And so we have to make sure that that part of our content is not stuck in what might be a 19th century model of an op-ed page, which I can appreciate because I've grown up with it that way. But that, the rising younger reader that's civically engaged, that content has to be in front of them. And so we're doing a lot of discussion right now as to what that will look like over the next year, and how can we sort of alter some of the playbook of what we're doing there to get at what you're talking about, but also just to engage the community more in a way that's different. And frankly, I want that part of what we do to feel more local, more Louisiana focused, and put less emphasis on some of the nationally syndicated columnists who tend to say sometimes exactly what you would presume they would say, whereas there could be an element of editorial surprise the more you engage the community. So I think on that front, my hope would be we can do more of what you're saying, but that also over the next year you all will see an even more Louisiana focus or Baton Rouge focus or Lafayette focus on those pages. And how that will turn out, I'm not sure yet, but we are talking about some reinvention of that part of what we do. Melinda, I see you over there.
So a lot of these organizations now get grant funding for various reporting positions, and everyone seems to handle it a little bit differently in terms of transparency. So I was wondering, what do you think, from your perspective for the Advocate and Times-Picayune, how transparent do you think that funding needs to be in the fact that the newspapers are getting that funding, and do you think you intend to have at the end of a story if those particular reporters are grant funded like a lot of other news organizations do?
Great question. I think a news organization that's always knocking on doors demanding transparency should also be very transparent. And so I think, that's all new too, right? We are quite fortunate to have some significant philanthropic help, both from individual donors, but more specifically from several large national groups that are interested in helping sustain and grow journalism. And so when we do a big journalistic project that is funded in part by such a group, we are trying to be more transparent and say, like, for example, we have an environmental team that is in part funded by the Walton Foundation, which is, quite a wonderful gift for us. But I do think we owe people a sense of who some of our partners are in that regard. And mostly because I just think it's the right thing to do, but also because on our end, with public officials, we have to push for more and more transparency at a time when there seems to be less and less. So, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Diane.
Yes, hey, Diane.
In talking about the election, and we have it coming up soon, I have an absentee ballot, and on the ballot are all the amendments, and we don't get enough information, I think, early enough for absentee votes. In other words, I have to send my ballot in. I already sent it in. And it's very difficult to understand the amendments. I'm an attorney, and I have my daughter working with me, and we did go to PAR, but I'm also aware that not many people can do what we did.
Right.
Not many people, a lot of people don't even have computers. And there's just not enough information early enough for us to understand amendments.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, across journalism right now, a lot of things are being rewired from old habits. And I think newsrooms across the country are still catching up to the rising phenomenon of early voting. And so it's forcing us in real time and at high speed to change some of our habits. So, for example, some of those discussions were occurring recently to say, what can we get in front of voters before early voting starts? But in a we never close business, 7 days a week, 18 hours a day, it's not a good excuse, but I can just say that I think a lot of newsrooms around the country are still habitually tied to Election Day. And that one of the things we have to get better at in both explaining the issues and presenting commentary on the issues when it's on the ballot is to get it done earlier. You will see some of that this fall, but I suspect it may be incomplete because we're adapting to, early voting used to be more marginal. And now as it sort of takes center stage, I just think we have to catch up in our planning and what we present to people much earlier. So I agree with your point, and we will be doing some of that, but the next election cycle we will have to be doing even more. Kelly?
The amendment story posted this morning at 6 o'clock.
That was one, yeah.
It's on the front page of the paper.
That's right, right. So that's a good start. I mean, that's an example of where we need to be, but I would argue that there's more of that we need to do as well. One of the things that I think we have to do heading into the governor's race, for example, and we will be talking about early next year, is that I think we have to put together like a digital voter's guide so that for months readers could access that. And what we have to do is take advantage of what digital allows, right? I mean, we could do that. We could have video from every candidate. There's just so much you can do that you can't do on the print side of things. And so I do expect next year that we will be doing something like a digital voter's guide that we can update along the way, that we can attach to everything we write about politics for months. In my old job, this is really interesting, I think. In my old job, we did that. And in the last election cycle, we put something like that in front of readers for months. And at the end of the year, when we had tried to assess like what form of content that we published digitally had gained the most eyeballs, that more people had spent time with, And we were actually a little surprised. The number one thing was that voter's guide, because it spoke to how hungry people are, to your point, just to have an understanding of candidates more deeply, issues more deeply. So I really believe in that, because based on the evidence I saw in my old job, readers really value that. It was the number one piece of content in 2021. So, other questions? Go ahead.
Say a bit about where readership is going, digital versus the newspaper, the trends over the last 5 years. Where do you think they're going?
Yeah.
What's your vision?
Yeah, they are certainly going digital. That's unmistakable. And, I feel like our job has to be to make sure what we produce in terms of coverage, that readers can get it the way they most want it. And many of them now only want it digitally, or they only want it in a newsletter rounded up so that they get every morning. And so our number one priority has to be making our coverage present well digitally, because all the numbers suggest that each year, incrementally, the digital readership is rising, and in particular, the readership on phones. It's really striking when you talk to people, say, roughly under 40. Again, in my old job, which I have to refer to because I'm so new here, about a year ago, we assembled a group of about 36 young professionals. They were all under 40, and they were from all walks of life. And the one thing they had in common was that they did not subscribe to media. And so we wanted to know, in conversation with them, what would it take? Why aren't you doing this? Tell us, what are we missing in terms of content, in terms of trust? And one of the striking, we learned a lot from that. It's very humbling. But one of the striking things we learned was that as we got to know them, that these various people in their 20s or 30s in some part of professional life, when they would talk about a story, they would say, gosh, I read this story this morning and it was so interesting. And I would say, you're not actually holding a phone right now. You're just holding your hand the way as if you have your phone in your hand all the time. And so we really have to focus on this mobile platform and how that presents to readers, far more than social media. But we cannot give up on print. One of the great mistakes around the country in the last decade are people giving up too quickly on print. I believe, and I will continue to believe, that we should keep investing to some extent in print. We just have in the Sunday print edition, and we have just seen the first evidence of how that pays off. About 4 to 6 weeks ago, we introduced new content in our Sunday print edition across all 3 markets, and already we are seeing that circulation stabilize in a way that's different than last year. So what we have to do for right now and for years to come is that great balancing act. It's not an either or. We have to charge digitally and make sure that the rising readership, that's how they will know us, that we are there. But that doesn't mean abandoning print or taking the self-defeating step of just cutting print to the point where it lacks value or it just feels like a generic product. And so what you will see is all kinds of new things digitally, but you will also see fresh investment in print, particularly Sunday print. And I think there continues to be a marketplace for that, and I can be non-judgmental about it, that like if people love print and want to be with us that way, that's fantastic. If people only want to experience us on the phone, that's great too. And we should be able to handle that balancing act in a way that this very sort of different set of readership can appreciate. But you will not hear me denigrating print, because I still think the numbers suggest that if you don't abandon it, there's a set of readership that is quite loyal to it to this day. So go ahead, Julie.
I guess I'm going to provide the context of saying that I think the organization looks like it's addressing what I'm about to ask about a little bit, but I want to know what you're doing to increase diversity on the staff. I mean, Louisiana is 40% people of color, and the staff of the 3 newsrooms is not. And I specifically am going to say, because it's close to where I work, I mean, the Capitol Bureau for the last 3 years has been staffed by 5 white men. So I am hoping that you open positions that there's going to be a change in that. So I wanted to know what you're doing to make the staff sort of more reflective.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, how should I say this? I said earlier that, you know, trust is earned. And I think one of the ways we earn trust I've talked about, which is the depth and fairness of your coverage. Another way you earn trust is sort of how you present to your readership. And we have a lot of work to do there, just as all newsrooms do. And I think there really cannot be, no matter how hard it is, you really can't fall back on the excuses to say you couldn't move the needle. Frankly, you know, in Minneapolis, when I was there, as a leadership group, we really did focus on that in the last year or two and made substantial gains. And I think what I noticed is the better you do there, the better you do there, which is to say, if you begin to fill out your editing and leadership course with diversity by gender and race, that all those people then present to future prospects and recruits the same way, and you gain momentum. And so, you know, I can't speak to where we've been, but I can say that I agree exactly with what you're saying. And I think that, you know, we have been talking a lot about that. And frankly, I was just in a meeting last week, and one of the things that I will require of our leadership group when it comes to goal setting for a year is that everyone has a diversity goal and it is specific. So we'll be pushing hard on that. It's difficult because all media are, and sometimes you get a victory that a year later you don't have. But it's imperative to the brand and the credibility of the brand and the credibility of your coverage. So, you know, I can never, it's not wise to forecast specifics, but I want to say directly that I would anticipate over the next year that you and others will see significant gains there. So, good question. Thanks for asking that, because it's just it's a bedrock part of how we should approach the news. Let's see. I want to make sure if anybody, you go ahead.
I think you said at the beginning that you all are on a growth curve, personnel-wise. Could you kind of characterize what you expect the workforce to look like over the next year or so? You mentioned diversity, but just in terms of...
Yeah, you know, boy, I don't want this to sound like a weasel answer, because I honestly don't know the specifics yet. All I know is that, one, we want to grow. Two, we think there's opportunity to grow. You know, when you look around this state, or unfortunately so many states in the country, you know, you have this rising phenomenon of news deserts where people just aren't getting the news. And we feel like there's an opportunity to try to address that in one way or the other. So honestly, maybe if I come back in 4 months or something, I would actually be able to say, see, look what we're doing. We don't know that now, but we're taking a hard look at that and asking, like, is there a prudent way to play offense in that regard and extend our staffing out that still keeps us financially stable and secure? I think the answer will be yes. But what I can't say at this moment is sort of project what that will be. My guess is that you will see incremental growth, and that we will fortify our reporting core in a few more places over the next 6 to 12 months that I think readers will welcome. I expect that to be, if we do fortify, I expect it to be on the news more than any other place, not necessarily in sports or other places. I feel like as the step for Washington reflects, I hope that we have to fortify on the news. And whether it's coverage of education, whether it's coverage of public health, whether it's coverage of all kinds of subjects. On the one hand, what I've inherited, I believe, is quite a miracle, right? And just I really admire what's been built because in some respects it's been built from scratch. And that doesn't happen too often in our profession. But what's playing before us is that we have got to take that to a next level or a next incarnation and try as best we can to sort of fill the void of places that really actually want news and are frustrated to not get it. And so we're doing a lot of discussion about that right now. I wish I could, I'm honestly not holding back any specifics. So maybe do invite me back in 6 months and I'll have some specifics. But I do expect us to incrementally grow. I really do.
So, and you say growth in terms of reaching out to new coverage areas and new markets?
I think it could be both. I actually would expect that it might be some combination of both. That kind of a fresh assessment of where in our current readership we might be strong or weak in terms of what we cover. And then also saying, but okay, where are we not at all? And what our coverage might be able to do in places like that. And so that'll take a while to figure out. The very first steps you've seen, though, are Washington, as well as we actually just did make a hiring move to fortify this new commitment to solutions journalism and to show people some of the things that are starting to, the way issues are being addressed in a way that is, if not solved, a valiant attempt to solve various questions. Melinda, do you have another one?
I do, if no one else.
Sure.
There's been a lack of independent polling in various election cycles. Most recently, Louisiana once upon a time had a lot of independent polling, and media organizations used to get together to finance some of that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you see that being a space that the Advocate and Times-Picayune will get into, and if there are any plans on that.
Yeah, I'd like it to be. I had the great blessing of being able to poll in my old job, and what we did was we worked with a national firm. We partnered, as you said, with other local media, and maybe once or twice a year we presented a really large poll that I thought the public valued significantly. The digital traffic reflected it. People really read it. And sometimes it was exceptionally illuminating about big questions on a ballot and stuff. For example, in Minneapolis in the last 2 years, we polled a lot on public perception of policing in the aftermath of the horror involving George Floyd in Minneapolis. And it was exceptionally illuminating. It was the kinds of things, even though polling is flawed or incomplete or just a snapshot, if you do it well, around all the polling science, if you really do more cell phone polling, if you sort of follow the way the science of that is evolving, it can be an important part of your coverage, even as you have to acknowledge it's just a snapshot in time. So to answer your question, gosh, it shows you how new I am. I don't quite know, but I really like to, at least once a year, well-timed. And my habit has been to sort of work with a crew of journalists and say, and a pollster, how much can we put into a poll? And from that, draw 6 or 7 stories that you can roll out over a week and have this sort of maximum impact. And what's so interesting about digital now is that if you do a good poll, it has a second and third life, because it can, A, inform the coverage in a way that in a polarized world that you have some empirical sense of what is public feeling on the issue, but you can keep citing the poll and people can click it and so on and so forth. So I am bullish on polling. I think it has to be done reputably and carefully so that you can present it to part of the readership that can be skeptical of it. But I've seen it done well. And so my hope is that we can just as we're reviving Washington coverage, that another piece of sort of new content or extended content would be some fresh commitment to polling in 2023. I do not think we'll do any this year, since there's only a few months left, but I would actually like to, particularly with the governor's race and some other issues of significant public impact. So, any other questions before we wrap up?
Time for one more question.
Go ahead.
What will these papers look like in 3 to 5 years?
Boy, if you knew the answer to that, you're hired. You know, I don't think any of us know, and I think if anybody who says they know, they're just winging it. You know, I feel like in 3 to 5 years, I think it could look much the same. There's no question that our digital audience will be larger and our print audience possibly will be incrementally smaller. But if we do our job, I actually think there is a sustained argument for 7-day print for years to come. Now, maybe not 15 years, but I just don't see anything from my perspective that suggests we have to turn away from print in the next 2 or 3 years. I think you'd be abandoning a significant part of your audience. It's also a platform that advertisers value for good reason. And so, you know, I'm not really good in the prediction business, but, you know, to take a swing at that, you know, I think that you would see a weekday paper that continues to have its place in some way. Frankly, my hope is that you would see a stronger Sunday print edition, because I would argue even over 10 or 15 years that I've just seen this. There's just evidence that even a digital reader can be enticed by Sunday print if you put enough value in it. And so I think there might be a really lasting argument for a long time for Sunday print or weekend print or something like that, maybe more of a magazine-style, tactile experience. But honestly, even in the short term, I think it would be folly to not be bullish on print, even as we commit ourselves more and more to digital platforms. It just really has to be an ongoing balancing act. And I think all the evidence nationally reinforces that. No kidding, as I was leaving Minneapolis, nobody faint, but as I was leaving Minneapolis, we were incrementally selling the same or more Sunday single copy print editions than we were the year prior. So there's evidence that, you know, print's never going to soar again. And in some ways, no growth is the new growth. But, you know, I just think it's a mistake to frame it right now or even 3 years from now as an either or proposition. So my sensibility will be to charge down both of those lanes. But frankly, you know, not to be so obsessed with either platform, right? The proof of who we are, our principles, our commitment of public service, it's in the work, right? We can't worship any platform. Our job is to focus most day in and day out on the strength of our coverage. Is it fair-minded? Does it have depth? And I think if we do that and live up to the high expectations you all should have, I think some of the platform stuff starts to take care of itself, whether it's print or the rising digital audience. And so, you know, as we wrap up, please know that, you know, I think I can speak for the newsrooms in saying we feel an acute sense of responsibility to live up to the high expectations you all want to have. We really appreciate people who care about their communities and the issues. And, you know, we really will be thinking about how most, before we get to products or all the other questions that surround a newsroom, that it is all about the strength of our content. And that is where I will be focused most, even as, you know, a whole bunch of other things are competing for second place on my to-do list. So thank you all very much. Good questions.
Melinda stole my question about the grant.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, I love those questions. And I could only...
I hope you know that's not like a person.
Oh, no,
but
no,
it was
no,
more
not
like
at all. Not at all. Not at all. Hey, thanks for the question.
I just want to give this to
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Bring me a couple of letters. I want to